May it please the Court. When considering affirmative action, it is constitutional and is consistent with the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. First, when considering the historical context of the 14th Amendment, affirmative action is consistent with its philosophical, legislative, and constitutional principles. The 14th Amendment arose from a desire to assist freedmen in becoming full participants and citizens in democratic society. The chains of slavery still remain in figurative shackles upon the hands of minority groups through such mechanisms as the cycle of poverty and the continuing low socioeconomic status of minority groups. Affirmative action at the University of Texas works to remedy these remaining institutional vestiges. Discriminatory policies such as federal appropriations for Howard University are considered constitutional, and affirmative action strives for the same goal with less drastic measures. In the court case United States v. Caroline Products, the court held in a footnote that the court would be committed to protecting discrete and insular minorities over property rights. Affirmative action is consistent with this mandate.
The University of Texas affirmative action policy in university admissions is consistent with the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment because it upholds the measure of strict scrutiny. The policy of affirmative action meets the compelling state interest of diversity in higher education, as proven by Grutter v. Bollinger and Regents of University of California v. Bakke. In addition, the policy of the University of Texas is narrowly tailored in the least restrictive manner to achieve this goal. As simply put, there is no other feasible way to increase diversity or maintain the diversity found in campuses that use affirmative action without that policy. As numerous statistics have shown, when affirmative action is banned, minority representation will fall, even when race-neutral policies are implemented. Previous rulings by the Supreme Court have built a foundation on which policies similar to those utilized by the University of Texas are found to be constitutional, and thus, the policy used by the University of Texas should be found constitutional by this court.
Okay. How should this court evaluate race-conscious university admissions programs? Please cite specific Supreme Court cases, including, but not limited to, Bakke, Grutter, Parents' Involvement in the Community Schools, and Ricci.
The court should find the race-conscious admission constitutional under the standard of strict scrutiny, following the reasons in cases such as Grutter. Diversity in higher education has been shown to fulfill a compelling state interest. In addition, the policy at University of Texas is narrowly tailored with the goal of diversity on campus. It does not use a strict quota system that was struck down in Bakke. Instead, it uses a similar approach to Grutter, using race as merely a considerate in the admission process, which was found constitutional.
Has the University of Texas at Austin shown that its use of race as an admissions plus factor meets a strict scrutiny test? Can you explain strict scrutiny and how it applies in this case?
Yes, the policy at University of Texas meets the strict scrutiny test. Under strict scrutiny, any discrimination involving race must fulfill a compelling state interest and must be narrowly tailored to fulfill that interest. Under cases such as Bakke, it is shown that diversity in higher education fulfills a compelling state interest. In addition, it is narrowly tailored as well, as there is no other way without race-explicit programs to increase diversity on campus. For example, when California passed a ban that essentially eliminated affirmative action, the percentages of African Americans on campus fell by 52%. In addition, the percentages of Hispanics, another minority, fell by 43%. Berkeley and UCLA attempted to create legally permissible ways to increase minority representation, such as giving advantage to low-income students and those who were the first in their family to attend college. However, this only stopped 20 to 30% of the loss in minority representation. This shows that race-explicit programs are the only way to increase diversity, and therefore the University of Texas program is narrowly tailored and therefore is constitutional.
Does the language of the 14th Amendment support the notion of race-based affirmative action? Why or why not? In answering this question, students should refer specifically to the language of the amendment.
When considering the 14th Amendment in the context of affirmative action, the Equal Protection Clause is the most pertinent. The Equal Protection Clause states, "No state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of laws." Now, the 14th Amendment was born out of the impetus of the post-Civil War era and a greater evolution in morality and thinking, suggesting that enslaving any person contradicted the ideals of the nation. The amendment sought to protect freedmen in the South who faced a hostile atmosphere. and it should still fulfill this sanctified, overarching purpose today. The history should not be ignored in this statement because slavery is inextricably connected to the Equal Protection Clause. The clause was designed to protect black slaves from the tyranny and oppression of their former masters. Its intent was to equalize the status of blacks, and this is consistent with the goals of affirmative action for minorities today. Affirmative action strives to help minority groups overcome the institutional disadvantages they face, just as the original intent of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment was to help black slaves overcome the institution of slavery.
Okay. Looking at the legislation passed during the Reconstruction era, does the weight of the historical evidence support affirmative action programs? Why or why not? In answering this question, please cite specifics of the following pieces of legislation.
Yes, the weight of these legislative acts support affirmative action programs. The amalgam of these legislative acts support these programs because the overarching theme of affirming black freed slaves in the South connects them. To cite a couple specific acts, the Act of March 3rd, 1865 was the creation of the Freedmen's Bureau to assist former slaves for 1 year. Then, in the Act of July 16th, 1866, they extended the life of the Bureau for 2 years. Finally, in the Act of July 25th, 1868, they dissolved the Bureau but retained its most essential program, its educational programs, for an indefinite time period. And the Congress Globe of the 38th Congress, spoken by Charles Sumner, talked of the need for intense aid to former slaves struggling in the South indefinitely. And finally, the Act of June 21st, 1866, established Howard University, a university that still receives federal funding today and focuses on studies of segregation, racism, and oppression, and caters to a mostly black student population. All of these acts of legislation focus on affirming minority groups through actions of the federal government. The overall tone and context of these legislative acts provide support for affirmative action programs as necessary to continue supporting later generations that continue to battle the same oppression, racism, and bigotry.
Explain the Freedmen's Bureau. Does this post-Civil War program provide support for affirmative action, extending to modern-day programs or not? What arguments were raised by proponents and opponents of the Freedmen's Bureau during the Reconstruction period?
The Radical Reconstruction Congress following the Civil War attacked the problems of continued discrimination and oppression of freedmen through legislation whose support came from the 14th Amendment. Much of this legislation manifested itself in the Freedmen's Bureau. Although the Freedmen's Bureau was discriminatory because it extended services only to former slaves, it was allowable. The Freedmen's Bureau focused heavily on educational opportunities for former slaves to help them find well-paid jobs and leave the cycle of poverty. If you look at affirmative action today, it espouses similar goals. It seeks to provide minority groups opportunities through increased access to education. Freedmen may no longer be sharecropping on fields in quasi-slave labor, but the fight for equality remains and different challenges exist. The Freedmen's Bureau provided a reasoning that still supports the notion of affirmative action in today's climate.
Okay. What are the lingering effects of slavery in modern society? Is it the state's responsibility to ensure that all badges and incidents of slavery are fully addressed?
The lingering effects of slavery in today's society it comes in the form of the continual oppression of African Americans in society. Although racial discrimination is now highly regulated under the standard of strict scrutiny, the generational cycle of poverty that emerged due to slavery and its legacy continue to shackle African Americans to the bottom tiers of society. It is the responsibility of the state to ensure that all the remnants and repercussions of slavery are fully addressed and dealt with, in order to make economic amends for all the damage that slavery and its legacy did to the African American people.
What do you make of the argument that we should live in a colorblind society?
In an ideal world, I would fully support that statement. However, this is not an ideal world. The consequences that arose from the long history of discriminatory practices against minorities still remain. Racial minorities, including African Americans and Hispanics, continue to be underrepresented in college and overrepresented in areas of socioeconomic disadvantage. Because of the history of oppression and missed opportunities, race continues to shackle minorities to the bottom of American society. In order to live in a world that can be colorblind, it is necessary to level the playing field through policies that give minorities the opportunities that have historically been taken from them.
Would you agree with Sandra Day O'Connor's assertion that affirmative action probably has a shelf life, that it should be done or accomplish its goal within, say, 25 or 30 or 40 or 50 years?
Yes, I would totally support that. I don't think affirmative action will be necessary forever once there is a full integration of minorities into the equal socioeconomic status of the Caucasian population, it is not necessary for affirmative action. However, that has not happened yet, so programs such as affirmative action are necessary to bring about that change.